Has the past year during the pandemic exacerbated my trauma? I'd have to say yes, it has.
Survivor Tribe sat down with 6 survivors of sexual trauma.
Hi, my name is Jessie, and I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is Jordan, and I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is May, and I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is Gillian, and I'm a survivor.
Hi, my name is Meghan, and I'm a survivor.
To discuss what the pandemic has been like for them.
I found myself just really being alone with my thoughts a lot more, which made it challenging to deal with some of those repressed memories and some of those pieces that I hadn't really had a chance to deal with when I was working like 10 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Here is what they had to say.
Has the past year during the pandemic exacerbated my trauma? I'd have to say yes, it has. It's difficult to explain, but as a survivor, I have complex PTSD, which is something that I've learned to, manage as best as I can. I've been recovering for the past 10 years, and the past year of having these feelings of uncertainty and fear and panic, and honestly not knowing if I'm going to see my family, when I'm going to see my family, and also of isolation. It brought back a lot of old memories. It also, it triggered repressed memories that I didn't even know were there. So this past year has been its own journey of really remembering things that happened 18 years ago when I was 16, that happened 10 years ago when I was 24, remembering specific moments that my brain had repressed. So it has exacerbated it. And I just feel grateful that I had coping mechanisms that I was able to turn to when those moments happened, where all of a sudden my brain was just flooded with these memories. And I'm sorry. It's a little difficult to put into words, but yeah, it's exacerbated my trauma, and it's unleashed repressed memories for sure.
So how has the pandemic exacerbated my own trauma? I would say that it's made me focus on different aspects of trauma and recovery and like different spaces in my life. Just like at the beginning of the pandemic, I was still in school and I was finishing school. And I was also trying to go to therapy in between like school work and doing that. So focusing so much on my trauma barely left me any mental headspace or just like emotional capacity to deal with a lot of other things. And being a perfectionist, I was really critical of that. Like, oh no, I have to deal with trauma and like triggers again. And I'd rather be doing my homework, or like I'd rather be hanging out with my friends, but I have to deal with this. So that was hard. And also just like moving back home with my parents after I graduated has been extremely hard because they don't know about my trauma history. So in their eyes, they see me a different way than I see myself. And that's just hard to kind of communicate and just kind of work around. I don't know. My family's never been very sex positive or very supportive about a lot of things. So it's just extremely hard to kind of handle that. And also just finding a therapist that works has been difficult, but I have been through a few, and I think I found one that's really good for me. So at least there's that. But I would definitely say that the pandemic has completely exacerbated my trauma on top of everything else that's going on.
So I would also say that the pandemic has exacerbated my trauma. I had kind of a unique situation in that I actually reported to the police shortly before the pandemic started. So in January, I started that process of reporting, and they basically use the pandemic and every other excuse in the book to put off dealing with my case, essentially. So for pretty much those 6 or 7 months between like January and August, I was just waiting to hear anything. So that was really challenging, especially because I also lived alone for the first 6 months of the pandemic. So it was like I found myself isolating a lot more, and I found myself just really being alone with my thoughts a lot more, which made it challenging to deal with some of those repressed memories and some of those pieces that I hadn't really had a chance to deal with when I was working like 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it definitely, yeah, I would say the trauma of just living through the pandemic really kind of compounded on top of my existing trauma that I was trying to deal with as well. And as Amy said, the perfectionism piece, it just, yeah, all of it together really kind of created a little bit of a mess for me to deal with. But things have recently been improving a little bit, but at first it was really, really challenging. So
I really like the imagery of created a little bit of a mess. And I agree with so many factors just compounded on top of each other. I think for me, my PTSD often shows up in feeling trapped and feeling confined within myself or within a moment in time. And so having this pandemic and quarantine when I really was trapped or I really was confined within a space, I think that made it harder to process my own PTSD and repressed memories, and made it harder to move through those feelings, especially when I was living in New York and I was in college. And then when the pandemic started, I had to move home back in with my parents, which is where my sexual assault happened. And so to be sleeping in the bed where I was raped and to be processing all of that and trying to find a home within this space that was so traumatic, while also processing the just kind of global trauma of the pandemic. It was definitely very challenging, and having to heal in this space and also do homework in this space and live in this space was a lot of just, compounded factors that made it really challenging to live and to work and to really breathe and give myself time to reflect on everything.
Thank you for sharing that, May. I know that's like a lot to share. For me, I definitely feel in a weird way, the pandemic did and didn't exacerbate the trauma. So for me too, it was weird. Like literally like a month before the shutdown, like I was assaulted. So it was like literally a month before. And then all of a sudden, hey, the world shut down. It was like really weird and crazy to process. Because at the same time, I don't think I would have been able to function normally going back to work, going back to school, seeing people. Like I think I would be flipping out like every day probably. I don't think I could have handled that. So in a way that was good for me to kind of be in the comfort of my home, have my dog, be cozy in my room and feel safe. But then at the same time, I felt like it worsened the trauma just because I wasn't able to try to go back to normal. Because usually like I'll distract myself if I go through really difficult things. I'll like go to church, I'll go hang out with friends and family. But literally we were self-isolating and I couldn't do any of that. So it led me to have to deal with it. And like I don't do well when I have to deal with difficult things in my life. So I think in a way it did like kind of exacerbate that trauma, not being able to go see my friends, like because I felt like I just had to do this on my own and it was really difficult for me. So yeah, my answer is more like a yes and no.
I'm with all of you on this. It's a yes and no, and it takes on so many shapes and forms. So for me, it was this image that kept coming up of the man that was sexually assaulting me right before I would go to bed. And that was really confusing because it had never come up before. And that happened in 2013. So for it to come up now was really strange. And I was really, really confused. I luckily have a great therapist to help me process and work through that. And then also confronting my parents for feeling like lack of protection as a child when there was grooming behavior in my family. So I think it gave my brain the respite from like the hustle and bustle of life, which then gave my brain the capacity to process things at like rapid speed. And that was just overwhelming and flooding. I think someone else had said a little flooding at some point in time. And then also with the civil rights movement going on this year, that just reminded me the way that our country is treating minorities is how we treat survivors, of like not believing and being like just such harmful attitudes. And that I just felt so sick of. Like, I don't know how else to explain. I was just so exhausted from hearing how we're talking about minorities in our country, and it just triggered everything in me about how we also talk about survivors. So it definitely stirred some things up for me throughout this year.
Okay, it's true and false for me. So a little bit about me is that a couple months before the pandemic started, my dad passed away very suddenly. And that was very traumatic. And then I was in college, and I was used to being in hypervigilant mode. So during that period of time, I was like, okay, as all of this is going on, but I've got to get this done. I've got to focus on school. I've got to make sure that I graduate. And then once I graduated in May is when things started to get harder for me. Being in, being in a constant state of arousal and always being kind of scared about if someone's going to hurt me, if something bad's going to happen. I started to become like paralyzed with fear. And I'm very close with my family. I'm lucky that they have been very supportive of me from when I first opened up to them and told them that I, had survived, a group sexual assault when I was younger. And I've been completely isolated from them for almost a year now. I live by myself. So yeah, I'd have to say it's true and false. In the beginning, I was go, go, go. I can do this. I can do this, because I had a goal in mind and I was going to get it done no matter what. And I was going to stay strong. But then as soon as that goal was accomplished and I had this quiet and I didn't really have anything to do other than search for a job and wait, that's when I would have panic attacks regularly. It was very hard for me to sleep. My mind would just race with, like what was mentioned, there was also a lot of civil unrest going on at the time. And as as someone who's Jewish, I was terrified. So I think for the beginning of the pandemic, I was calmer than my counterparts. But then for the past, how many months has it even been anymore? I don't even know. For the past like 7 months, I think I've been more stressed out and more anxious. And it seems like the longer this goes on, kind of like the worse it gets. Like the closer we get to the finish line, it just feels like, are we ever really going to get there? Like, am I ever going to be able to see my family again? The people who were there for me when I had nobody. And that's just something that I try to just live with, and just keep moving forward. Just try to think that this escalator's going up and we're headed towards a better tomorrow.
I think for me, it's false. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I especially felt more hypervigilant than like everyone else, even though they were all kind of feeling it too. But I think in the beginning, we were kind of just feeding off of each other, like me and the other students that I interacted with in my classes. And so that kind of like, I kind of fed off of that, and it kind of made it worse for me. But also just like going forward and like finishing school and then having to move back home and kind of deal with that, it wasn't easy. And I think it made my hypervigilance even worse. Just like moving back home with my parents and seeing how like misogynistic the men in my family can be. And that's been very hard to like accept. And I've tried to like defend myself and kind of have a conversation about that with them, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So like now I would say maybe I'm a little more at ease, but I wouldn't say that I'm like my hypervigilance has completely dissipated. Like I still feel it even now, being back home or just like finding some time for myself. And I'm sure it'll calm down a little more maybe in the next couple months, but yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, I would say true. Specifically earlier in the pandemic, so before everything kind of shut down, I was working in a really toxic work environment that was actually, according to my therapist, re-triggering a lot of my PTSD. So I think that I was already on like such hypervigilant mode that when the world shut down, it gave me a little bit of breathing room, at least from that environment, so that I wasn't constantly like being retriggered and being overstimulated and all of that type of stuff. But I would say in the more recent months, it's like started to hit me all at once. Because I think, yeah, I don't know, I felt very disconnected from it in the first couple months of the pandemic. And then I moved to Philly, and just all the change, I think, didn't really give me a second to stop and kind of process things. And I started a new school and all of that type of stuff. But I think more recently, and I think it's also with like the seasons changing, and the winter has not been kind to me. I think more recently it's all started to kind of catch up with me, whereas like everybody else around me seems to have kind of like been experiencing it for the last year, and I'm just experiencing like a year's worth of stress and anxiety all at once. So I think, yeah, I think it's kind of like a yes and no. But earlier in the pandemic, I think I was feeling a lot more calm about it when it seemed like it had more of an end point, but recently that's seemed like less of a thing. So
I think also, yes. I remember being like 13 and in therapy for one of the first times and explaining to my therapist that I just expected that nothing would ever work out, and that I expected chaos, and that I expected all of these horrible things to happen, and that if those things didn't happen, I would be more surprised than happy. And I remember her saying, "Oh, that sounds like PTSD. That sounds like complex PTSD. Like, let's delve in deeper into that as an idea." And so that has kind of carried over into my experience of the pandemic. I've been really surprised to hear how people are shocked that it's still happening. I just assumed kind of as soon as it started, like, well, this is only going to get worse. This is just going to steadily get worse. And listening to my peers be shocked when we weren't able to go back to school the first time, shocked by different politicians handling it poorly. When really my expectation was that it was going to be handled poorly and that I wouldn't be able to leave my house for a long, long time. So I definitely think that my own personal hypervigilance in my life gave me a greater sense of calm and also lower expectations for what was going to happen, because I have very, very low expectations for institutions and for people in power because of my own experiences with reporting or talking to people about sexual assault or sexual harassment. I know how low people's capacity to create change can be. And just that is something that's kind of compounded within myself and has kind of given me a chip on my shoulder when I think about institutions of power. And so with this pandemic, I was very sure that it was going to go on longer than it needed to, and that we were going to be stuck in our homes. And so I think that I had a level of calm and level of understanding that perhaps others didn't. However, I think that especially over the summer, that started to wane, and I started to get that more like frantic panic of like, okay, I knew that this was how it was going to be. I sort of had this expectation, but now I am feeling those emotions and feeling that anxiety and feeling that panic, because even though I had set this standard that this is how it's going to be, and I had kind of tried to settle into it and settle into this traumatic event, I still was going to face that panic and that stress and the anxiety of living through a global pandemic. So I definitely think, as everyone has said so far, really yes and no, true and false. It's sort of come and waves, and I have waves of extreme calm or disassociation and feeling really, really certain of how I'm doing, and okay, I'm safe, everything's fine. And then I have waves of feeling really out of control and feeling really unsafe and just really desperate for human connection and for the sensations that I'm missing so much in my regular life.
Yeah, for me, it's like true and then also false. I think more at the beginning of the pandemic, though, is more of the answer is more true, because I think I had already gone through the biggest trauma I'd ever gone through, that like kind of the world shutting down wasn't that big of a deal because I already felt like I was shutting down. So it was like nothing could really surprise me after what happened. So I think that's why I was kind of calm and just seeing where this pandemic was going. Because who knows, maybe like in a month it would have ended. Like I didn't really know. So the uncertainty didn't really affect me because I was kind of just chilling, relaxing, being at home, being okay with just being at home. But then I think as the pandemic has like gone on to almost a year, then I think my anxiety started to rise because now I'm like, okay, when are things really going to start kind of going back to normal so I can kind of move on with my life? But yeah, so I think it kind of changed over the course of some time, but initially, true, I was a lot calmer.
I'm with you all again, true and false. At first, I was like, oh, it's just 2 weeks, not a big deal. We can do this. And then 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and 2 months turned into 4 months, and 4 months turned into 6 and 8, and now we're almost a year. And I think it really hit me to where I was more hypervigilant when I was in the grocery stores and couldn't see people's faces. And that really bothered me. Not because we shouldn't wear masks. I believe we should mask up. It just was that I couldn't see who was around me, what they were doing. Are they looking at me? And yeah, that's how it impacted me. Now I feel like it's just that lack of control of like, okay, we're being controlled and I don't like this. And I know it's for the greater good. I get that, but it's still really difficult.
At first, I would have said that it has been more harmful because because since I do live alone and my family is, my mom and my sister and my nieces, they're my rock, they're my best friends, and I've been completely cut off from them and unable to see them for a year. I have spent so much time alone and have had to relive these moments, like one of you mentioned before, remembering a specific moment. And for me, the past in particular, the past probably 6 months, because my boyfriend and I broke up in September, so it's almost been 6 months. So now I've been completely isolated. I just have started to have these thoughts in my head that I really had thought that I'd worked through and processed through therapy and through I teach yoga for trauma and for recovery. I thought that I'd processed them. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to sleep and I just have this memory of 6 bodies looming over me, holding me down. And it's been hard for me to sleep because of that. And and then these other memories start coming back of just maybe 10 seconds or less. And I wasn't able to, to make them go away. But then ultimately, it's helped me to heal because I've been forced to sit with these memories, and I've been forced to sit with the fact that these individuals are still out there. And I've had to spend a lot of time, thinking about that, and just my self-esteem ultimately ended up going up because of this, because I've just been sitting here thinking about what I lived through and what I survived. And then not only surviving that experience, but surviving every day after that made me realize how strong I am and how much of a miracle it is that I'm here right now and that I'm able to speak and I'm able to talk about what happened and hopefully, help somebody. So I'd have to say that it actually has been as difficult as it's been and as painful as it has been to have to relive things that have happened so long ago. It actually ended up helping me to heal.
I would say also yes and no. Initially, it was more harmful just because I felt really isolated. I was still living in my apartment and I still struggled with dealing with triggers. And I think the thing that kind of pissed me off the most was trying to find a coping mechanism or different coping mechanisms for different situations. And that really burned me out. It was just harmful because I felt like I could never like experience happiness or like find something good in the moment to like distract myself. And that kind of just made it worse. Like I was really depressed for probably 4 months. Um, and it was hard to get out of bed and like still function and still being able to go to school and do all that stuff. Um, at the same time, though, I agree also. Like, I think it's been really helpful because it's made me focus more on my trauma and like self reflect and kind of figure out how my brain works around all of this. And then getting a better understanding of that so that I know how to like pick myself up even more. And like, it's still a process and I'm still learning, but I feel like now that I'm back home, I've given myself more time to breathe and like work through these things. And I feel, even though I'm still like on my own with all of my recovery and stuff, I feel more at peace with it and like in control of it, if that makes sense.
I think ultimately it's been more healing. I do think there have been parts of it that have been more harmful. So I guess I'll talk about that first and kind of how it's like led to more healing. But I do think being isolated from my support system for a while was really, really challenging. And not really, because I tend to isolate more when I'm like not in the best mental place anyway. So it kind of forced me to actually like socialize and like pay attention to my body's cues a little bit more and to the cues of when I was starting not to feel as great, which actually really helped because I always say that like in the place that I was in before quarantine, I was working so much and I was doing so much that I just didn't always take note of the cues of when I was starting to slip as much as I do now, which I think in a lot of ways is good because it allows me to take note of it more and use coping skills more in the moment rather than like if I'm dealing with a million different things at work and I'm in like the workplace, it's a lot harder to do that in the moment. So it's given me a lot more practice of being able to do that when there isn't a ton at stake, so to speak. Especially because I was also going through the process of like switching medications and everything for my PTSD and my anxiety right before the pandemic. And I probably would have had to take time off work anyway because I was just having so many adverse side effects. So it really gave me time to just kind of focus on myself without having to worry about like the other things that were going on around me at the same time, if that makes sense.
I think having this time was beneficial for me in two key ways. The first being, I think I was in New York and I was already feeling, before the pandemic started, I was already feeling very anxious and triggered at the idea of coming home for the summer. I was already trying to come up with excuses or reasons to be able to stay in the city and not go home because I knew that there was a lot of unresolved trauma that I would have to address and face coming home and being here in Portland. And I didn't really want to do that. And I was feeling very scared of what that would look like. And so I think that while that was initially very triggering and it was a very hard thing to come home, especially during such a traumatic time, to have to come home and handle that was challenging. But I think in the end, it was necessary and important because this is, my childhood home and it's a place that I wanted to reclaim and a place that I wanted to come to have a peaceful relationship with. But I think if I hadn't been forced to come home, I don't know how long it would have taken me to really come home and do this work, especially because there wouldn't have been really a reason for me to be sleeping in that bed in my childhood bedroom, like where so much happened. It wouldn't have really made sense. So this kind of forced me to really address and work within myself to overcome a lot of the anxiety and PTSD I have connected with this space and this home, which I think was really important for my growth as a person. And separating physical space from trauma, I think was really, really vital for me as a survivor. And then also I was in the process of getting diagnosed with vaginismus, which is a condition that didn't allow me to have sex or penetrative sex at least, and that had really controlled my life since I was raped. It was something that I made having normal sexual encounters almost impossible and really dominated my relationship with my body and my relationship with recovery and sex. And it just made my PTSD so much more exacerbated because I was constantly feeling that pain and having that reminder. So having this dedicated time allowed me to really work on that and get dilators and go to physical therapy and actually address that as a problem within therapy and physical therapy, and really take that time to heal a physical aspect of my trauma that I don't think I would have done if I hadn't really, again, kind of been forced to confront these many aspects of trauma. So I think that the initial force of having to address these things was inherently traumatic, and it was inherently grief producing to have to work through these things in such a abrupt way. But I'm really proud of the work that I have done as an individual during this time, and I am happy with the way it has affected me going forward as a survivor, and I feel stronger for it, even though, you know, it was challenging and it wasn't necessarily easy.
So I feel like the pandemic actually was more healing for me because it kind of gave me an excuse to kind of just get away from everyone and have my own space, because everybody else was doing it. So no one would have been like, where's Gillian? And like trying to check in on me all the time, because it was kind of like normal. Everyone's just self-distancing and they're just social distancing. And so it kind of made it so that way people weren't so on me, if that made sense. Like I could just be by myself and just like handle this. And I was fortunate enough to be quarantined with my family and my little dog, who like literally, she was my comfort animal, like, and she still is. And so having that, I'm like very grateful for, because I know not like everyone was sharing, not everybody has that. And so I was really grateful for that. But in some ways it was harmful though, just because since I was self-isolating, I was definitely having lots of suicidal thoughts. There are numerous times where, and I'm sorry if I'm triggering anyone, there are definitely times where it was like really bad and it like I almost went through with it. And I'm grateful that I used resources that I could, and I just thought it through, like, because I thought, like, you know, like I had my therapist and my family, and even though it was difficult, I had those conversations with them, and I think that helped me a lot. So I definitely know that the isolation led to like possible self-harm and just bad coping. But at the same time, I think this pandemic has been more healing just because I could stay away from most of the triggers.
I'm glad you're still here, Gillian. Just want to say that. I know it's tough. I know most of us have experienced probably suicidal ideation at the least. So I would say that it was more healing for me to go through the pandemic as a survivor. Definitely painful, like Jessie said, like there was so much pain and strife that came because different manifestations of the trauma came out. And that also caused me to like have really strong body reactions to what I was experiencing and gut instincts. And it led me to confront the person who assaulted me. I actually went through law enforcement at the college I went to, and they went above and beyond because of the work I do, and I work in the field. So I had a lieutenant on my side pushing for things, which is really fortunate, and it still didn't work. So even when you have all of this access to resources and privilege, the system still fails, in my opinion. And so that caused me to like not feel like I got justice in any way, of course. And so the only justice I could get is if I forced myself to get the justice that I need. And I could find him and they couldn't. And so I actually called him and confronted him, and he did say sorry. And that was the most healing thing I have ever heard and experienced in my life. And I have since been able to share my story like here for the first time, as well as sign up to speak at a conference internationally to share that story to help other people. And that has been the most healing part of my process, because before that, like I said, I was seeing images of him every night for weeks at a time and going to my therapist and saying like, why won't this go away? Like it just won't go away. And it took him saying sorry. So it was really, really healing. It was hurtful and really healing.
time in quarantine has absolutely forced me to deal with things that I was not facing. 100% true. So when I first began my healing journey, I hadn't processed everything that had happened. And I decided that the way that I was going to heal was to 100% throw myself into helping other people. So, I mean, it was a few months after, I was assaulted at the age of 16, and then I was raped twice in the following 8 years. So when I was around 25, I started to go to therapy. I started to accept that it had happened. And I became a yoga instructor. I started to throw myself into just helping. I went back to school so that I could help. And for me, it was, if I can help other people, then this didn't all happen to me for no reason. And that was the point of it. So that's what I'd really spent years focusing on, was just helping others. And this past year of not being able to go out and, teach these yoga classes, of not being able to, be around other people. I even had this idea before the pandemic started of starting an open group in Bucks County for female and LGBTQ survivors of sexual assault, so that we could all have a community to come together. Then the pandemic happened, and I'm just left with me. I'm left with myself. I'm left with my trauma, with my PTSD, with my symptoms, with images, and it forced me to sit down and take a look at them and really process them, and really, for the first time ever, start to process what had actually happened, and to process on my healing instead of other people's healing. And although a huge part of my journey continues to be wanting to help other people, I realized that I am one of those people too, and that I survived, and that I deserve that same love and that same support. And I'm going to give that to myself. So yeah, it forced me to have to deal with things. And as painful as it is, and as hard as it can be, and, like was mentioned, I've considered hurting myself a few times in the past year, a lot of ideation. And that's something that I've had to look at too. So ultimately, it's been a blessing in disguise. Because if I hadn't had almost a year of just sitting here with myself, with my heart, with my head, and with, years of painful memories, I'm not sure if I would have ever focused on me and not everybody else.
I agree. The pandemic has definitely forced me to face things that I wasn't dealing with before. Um, I had started to go to therapy about a year and a half before the pandemic hit, to deal with processing my trauma, specifically the rape. But I wasn't really taking the time to dedicate myself to do that. I would go to sessions, and we'd talk about things, and I'd kind of like make cliff notes of maybe things that I could apply to my own life, but I was still trying to live my life normally outside of the trauma, and going to school, and focusing and being a really good student, and dedicating myself into my schoolwork to distract myself from my trauma. And now, in the pandemic, I've definitely focused more on what I need to do to support myself and feel better. And um things that I wasn't facing, I've noticed I've had problems with self-perception versus world perception, specifically street harassment, because I felt like almost every time I would go outside, no matter where it was, I would deal with catcalls, or concerts specifically being groped a lot of the time. And that would just be a really big trigger for me. So now I still kind of struggle with that, not trying to focus on how other people might see me, but how I feel about myself. I mean, it's even led me to cut my hair, because I thought that if I cut my hair, maybe people wouldn't see me as feminine, and they wouldn't treat me like a woman or like a little kid, because I am short for my my size, and I just look young for my age. So I just thought maybe that's kind of like the end all be all. But like among other things, I've started like working on that, and um, it's been hard. It has been really hard. There's definitely been low points, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say it absolutely has forced me to deal with certain things that I didn't necessarily want to be honest. I know, and there have been things that have been like directly related to my trauma that I've been working through in therapy. But there have been also, sorry, can't speak. There have also been ways where it's shown up in my life that I don't think I was realizing that it was affecting me until very recently. For example, I'm almost 24 and I've never been in a relationship, and I don't think I realized how much my trauma was affecting that and how much that fact was like affecting my self-image and like how I see myself and how I perceive myself kind of moving through the world. So I think that it has allowed me to like really hone in on kind of nuances like that I don't think I would have been able to deal with prior to going to therapy, and then just having like all this extra time to really, it kind of forced me to be selfish in a lot of ways, because similar to Jessie, like I've really always tried to like heal myself through like helping other people. Like I went to school for social work. I worked at a high school for a while. I'm currently in school for counseling. So yeah, I think a lot of my identity has been wrapped up in helping other people. So the fact that like it's given me all this extra time where I could be selfish has really allowed me to kind of dive deep into some of the ways that my trauma has affected me. So
Yeah, at the risk of repeating myself, I think the process of moving home and re-entering this space that I have had so many traumatic feelings around, and that I had experienced such a traumatic event within, I kind of looked at it very differently. When I was in high school and still living in the space, I was raped when I was 15, and so I then spent close to 3 years still existing in that space and still living in that bedroom. And I spent a lot of time sleeping in my brother's room or sleeping somewhere else, or sleeping on the floor, or just feeling very disassociated within my space, not really going through periods where it didn't really feel like mine, or then being hyper connected to it and rearranging things. And then I would sort of vacillate between those things. But then when I came home this time, it had this feeling of permanence and feeling very stuck, because I really had to be there and there wasn't somewhere else to be. So I didn't want to sleep somewhere else. I didn't want to be in another room. I wanted to really define this space on my terms, because it was the only space that was really mine. And I think that that was a really, really hard process, but it made me confront all of the feelings that I had had, and it made me really think about the effects that had had, and the effects of not only being sexually assaulted, but being sexually assaulted in a place that was so intimate and it was supposed to be so safe, and how that has affected me and my relationships with others, and the closeness that I crave from people, to sort of offset that fear of vulnerability. So I think that it really forced me to do a lot of personal work, not only internally, but externally within my space. I mean, I burnt my bed sheets. I like went out and I lit them on fire, and I just got rid of them, and I got rid of my comforter that I had had, and I completely redefined my relationship with my bed and with sleep and rest and the idea of self-care, because those were all things that needed to happen within this space. And so in order for me to be able to take care of myself, I had to redefine the space. It was really survival. And so I think that was really challenging and very emotionally charged, but in the end really allowed me to have a better relationship with my space and with my body, and better, it will allow me to get better moving forward and continue to grow, and as I go on my journey as a survivor.
So true for me. Definitely, I feel you on the same thing, like Jessie, Jordan, you're talking about, like just trying to help other people and just like putting yourself like, and just throwing yourself in work or serving or whatever it is that you do, teaching. I definitely would do that. So I feel like this time in quarantine has forced me to deal with things, which in a way I feel like was healthy, because then I know that if I would have just repressed all of it, it would have come out down the road and it would have just been terrible. I feel like it would have been an explosion. And I like want to challenge like you, Jessie and Jordan, like taking care of your well-being and yourself is not selfish. I feel like it's a form of self-love. And I think if you go in that mindset of like, this is for me, I'm trying to be a healthy, better person, because you can't pour out of an empty jar, basically. And I've heard that before. Like, if you're not filled up, if you're not doing well, how are you going to be able to fill up somebody else? So it's not selfish. I feel like it's definitely self-love, self-care. And I think going into that mindset is so much better, because I used to be the same way. If I would spread myself way too thin and I would feel bad. And then I realized, no, I need to take care of myself. Otherwise, how am I going to be there for somebody else? And then Amy, the same thing too. I cut my hair too. So my hair is all short, and it's the same kind of situation where I cut it because I always thought short hair was cool, but I cared too much about how people like what people thought. And I was like, they're going to think I'm ugly or whatever. But then this time, like around, I was like, nah, I'm going to do it for myself and, love it and just accept it and not really care about what other people think. So yes, I love your hair.
Gillian, I was thinking the same thing about the self-care thing. Jordan, I was like, no, it's not selfish. It's necessary. Like, we can't go on without taking care of ourselves. Like, it just becomes exhausting and fatiguing. So yeah, self-care is absolutely necessary. So time in quarantine forced me to deal with things I was not facing. So I didn't know, like, it wasn't that I was like avoiding something intentionally. It just, I think, gave my brain the space to, have new things come up related to the assault, multiple assaults. I've been assaulted twice and then groomed as a child by multiple family members, unfortunately, and harassed. So I think it gave me courage in some way. I don't know if it's because it's 4 or 5 years in therapy, I'm sure. And maybe just a lot of time to reflect and think, because we're not, again, like go, go, go. Like, I'm a very busy person. I like being busy, and the quarantine really made me like not be busy. So it made me confront people that I felt like it's not their fault. However, their lack of action perpetuated like me being set up to kind of like be assaulted, because we know that if we've experienced child grooming or sexual abuse and we didn't get like the proper education or counseling or help or support, then it sets us up to be assaulted later in life, unfortunately. And so I was really angry. So it forced me to deal with that anger and confront people for being like, you didn't help me. Like, where were you? And it gave me that courage to do that. So I think it's not that I avoided it. It's just, I think, like being by myself and really allowing myself to trust what I was thinking and what I needed to do for my healing is what happened. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what's coming to my mind.
Okay, I could talk about what I've been doing for self-care for like an hour or so, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. I want to first mention music. For me, music has been huge for my self-care. So I use Spotify. So what I'll do is I've been making playlists a lot. So I'll make a playlist with songs that I know are safe and will calm me down. So I have that, and then I have a playlist of songs that all make me really happy, and I'll just start dancing. Like, it'll literally be like midnight and I'll be like maybe like really stressed out, and I'll go to like my happy dance playlist and I'll just start like busting a move, and I'm just like dancing like crazy, and then it just feels so good. It's like physically I'm letting out the energy. Like the endorphins are going, the songs are so positive, because when I make my playlist, I really try to make sure that the songs are not going to be triggering for me. So even making the playlist has been therapeutic, and then listening to it is therapeutic. So music and dancing and it's been like huge for me. Another thing with self-care is giving myself like like Meghan and Gillian touched on, is loving myself and not being hard on myself for the way that I'm feeling. So like having like mantras that I'll repeat to myself. Just if I feel really tired that day, like I do work full time and sometimes from home, but like if I'm just exhausted and I don't want to read that book that I just bought, or I don't feel like meditating right now and I don't want to do yoga. I just want to lay here and I just want to watch Netflix and I just want to be a blob. I'm like, okay, you need to rest. Like your body's telling you to rest and to binge that show on Netflix, and that's what you need. And I just try to like really have the self-love talk. Another thing is meditation has been really big for me. Like on YouTube, there's Jason Stevenson is awesome. He has like 3-hour long meditations that you can listen to before bed, and he has this like really cool Australian accent. And then Kelly Howell is also great. So like YouTube meditations. And I want to say, I think, because I think this is really important, I utilize hotlines. If I'm having suicidal ideation to the point where it's something that I'm actually thinking about, I'll call 1-800-273-TALK and I'll speak to someone. And when I was in a relationship and I was having those feelings and he was sleeping, or I didn't want to speak and use my voice, I would utilize the crisis text line, which is 741-741. And you can text that number and someone will respond to you and you can have a conversation without having to speak out loud. So, so yeah, like dancing, music, aromatherapy, all these things. But yeah, the hotlines have been, I think, are really important to use when you need it.
I agree with you, Jessie. For me, I know as a part of my self-care, I like to reach out to this hotline in San Francisco called SFR. It's San Francisco Women Against Rape, and it's specifically for survivors. And you can talk to trained peer counselors with like a trauma-informed background, and you can talk to them for like 15 minutes, especially if you're having a crisis, and they're really supportive. And a lot of the time, I feel like it really helps. Like most of the time, I just need some like validation or just reassurance that I'm gonna be okay, because sometimes it feels like my world is gonna end. But having another voice to kind of just listen and kind of talk me down from it, it's really nice. Also, journaling has been very, very helpful. Really good to like, again, kind of self-reflect and like learn more about myself and how I work, and like especially in relation to trauma. That's been really beneficial for me. And also just like spending time outside, going for walks, like taking my dog for walks, and like trying to find more moments of joy, like reading a book on the porch, or like making some tea and like enjoying every last sip of it, because I don't take the time to kind of be present in the moment. And that really helps ground me.
Yeah, I have also been journaling a lot, which has been really great. I'm in grad school and I'm in a dual degree program for peace and conflict resolution and counseling. And for 2 of my classes this semester, actually, they're requiring us to keep like journals for our week. So I've been trying to really kind of lean into that and utilize those right now in a more formal structure. But in the past, I've also done a lot of journaling and writing. Really just finding any type of creative outlet has been really helpful for me. So that's been really great. I was doing a lot of crafting earlier in the pandemic, but since grad school started, I haven't had as much time to do that. And I think it was Jessie who was saying this, but also honoring when I just need to rest has been incredibly helpful, and trying to really get past like the feeling guilty about it if I feel like I should be doing something else. I'm really like taking notice of when I'm feeling guilty about resting and trying to kind of change that inner dialogue around that. So those 2 things specifically have been really helpful for me.
Yeah, dancing is something that has been really, really important to me. And just finding time to move my body in a way that isn't constrained to like an exercise class or something that I'm, being told to do. But it's just really, really free and comfortable for my body and what I'm comfortable doing in that moment. And I like going for long walks and finding weird little places to dance in the street or in a park, where just I can have like a little moment of spontaneity within myself. And I think that has been really special, especially when things are so constrained right now. Just dancing in the street at night just feels very, very free and very lovely. And yeah, I think, as everyone sort of said, the idea of rest and prioritizing rest and not beating myself up if, at the end of the day, I didn't get as much done as I thought I was going to, still knowing that maybe I didn't get as much done, but I still need to value rest, and I still need to prioritize that. If my body's telling me I need to rest, then that is probably what I need to do. And I need to be aware of my own personal needs in the way that they relate to how I interact with others. And so setting boundaries in personal relationships and really just hearing myself. And even if I don't completely know why I'm feeling a certain way, being honest with myself that I am in fact feeling that way, and maybe going for a walk or taking a shower and allowing myself to think about why I'm feeling that way, but honoring it nonetheless, even if I never figure out why I was feeling sad or why I was feeling, angry, just allowing that emotion to be real and to be validated, and giving that like its own space, which I think I like to do on walks or in the shower, in a bath, like somewhere that is special and where I can feel like alone but safe and comfortable. I think that that's really important. I've been talking aloud verbally a lot, just to myself, and talking through things with myself. Sometimes, talking to myself as though I'm a friend, because I think something I'm very aware of is I'm much kinder to friends, and I think a lot of us are, to friends, than I am to myself. So talking through my problems verbally as though a friend has come to me and said, I'm feeling this way about my body. I'm feeling triggered through my trauma about this. And then talking through it as though I'm a friend, because, learning to love myself as though I am my best friend, because I am, and I'm the person who's always going to be there for me. And I think that that's been really, really special.
Okay, I love this topic so much. And I kind of want to talk about like this, it's like taboo still, but it's definitely something that's helped me. And especially in the Christian community too, it's kind of taboo. And I am a Christian, but I'm also just one that like just is working things through with like Jesus and figuring things out. But honestly, like it sounds weird. I always get embarrassed saying it, but like masturbation was something that helped me a lot. It kind of helped me gain control of my body, and made me kind of like love myself again, because when I first was assaulted, just looking in the mirror and looking at my body, I felt really disgusted, and I felt embarrassed by it and dirty. And so I kind of changed that, and it's kind of weird, but I look at my body naked and just kind of like love it, like for all that it is, all the insecurities. And it sounds weird, like, because I guess not a lot of women do this, but I look at my vagina, and I know that sounds weird. Like I'll look at it in a mirror and kind of just like not see it as something that is somebody else's or someone else possesses, but it's mine. And like, I'm taking power over it again and loving it. Cause at first I would like cry when I looked at it, but now I look at it and I'm like, so I did that too. I felt empowered by it. But yeah, that is something I definitely did a lot and still do. Outside to therapy, I love exercising too. I love moving my body around. I just feel healthy and happy, and it helps relieve stress when I exercise. Bubble baths are a big one for me. Just taking care of my skin too. Like I love doing like face masks and like finding good moisturizers, eating yummy foods, resting, cleaning, going outside, Netflix, music, reading, hanging out with my friends. So I have a lot.
So my self-care is a lot of things too. It just definitely depends on like what's happening, and listening to my body, is like a lot of us said. So rest at times, therapy, of course, yoga. I danced as a kid, so I wanted to get back into tap and ballet. So I did that for a little bit because I really, really missed it. And living by the shore, sunsets and the water always are so calming for me. And I also had 2 traumatic losses in the beginning of pandemic. So I would go out for walks when I was like having moments of panic or overwhelming emotion. So a lot of walking, talking to my friends when things were really difficult for me, or my coworkers, because unfortunately we had lost a coworker. And then like just looking at memories of my cousin, because I had lost my cousin. I mean, the pandemic has affected us in so many ways. So I'm trying to think of anything else. Yoga, I said, I think. Friends, with my Friends mug. I watch a lot of Friends and Netflix. Things that make me like think of like lighthearted things, because the world is so serious right now. And as survivors, I think we're heightened and attuned to like humanity. And so like anything that's like lighthearted and funny. Also crime podcasts.
Remember that you're not alone. Even if you're feeling so lonely and isolated, that you're not alone, that there are so many women who are experiencing the same feelings that you're experiencing right now, and that there are communities that you can turn to if you feel comfortable. To, you know, the Survivor Tribe is one of them, you know, to go on Instagram and follow the Survivor Tribe and read some of the threads. If you feel comfortable, comment, make connections, start to talk to other people who are going through the same things that you're going through, feeling the same things that you are. My other advice is to honor yourself, to honor your mind, to honor your heart, to honor your body, and to listen to it, and to, you know, like a lot of us, like a lot of you've been saying, to talk to yourself the same way that you talk to a best friend, because we tend to be so difficult on ourselves, and to love everybody else and to not show that same love to ourselves. But how would you feel if you had a best friend who hated themselves, who was hurting? What advice would you give to them? That's the same advice that you should give to yourself. Another piece of advice that I would give, that I think is really important, is to not be afraid to utilize hotlines. If you're starting to feel really low, and it's, you know, your thoughts are going down a negative path, and you're having trouble reeling them back in, you know, to call a hotline, to talk to somebody. And if you're not able to use your voice to talk for whatever reasons, to text the crisis line, 741-741, because there are people who really care. There are people who love you. There are people who have been there, have, you know, experienced this. You're not alone. My advice is that you're a survivor. You're a badass. You're a miracle, and to not give up. Do not give up. Keep going. And every day is just gonna get it's a part of your journey. And, you know, there's a 24-hour survivor hotline. There's so many hotlines that are available to use. Another piece of advice that I'd have is to, you know, like Meghan said, like going back to things from childhood that brought you joy, things that used to bring you joy that maybe you haven't done in a long time. For me, it's singing. Like my neighbors probably think I'm like crazy. I don't care, because I sing. Like I just sing, and it makes me so happy. Like I was recently like singing like that George Michael song Freedom, and I'm like, freedom, and I'm just like singing it, and I'm just letting it out. And I haven't done that since I was like literally 12 years old. And it feels so good, and it feels so freeing. And to just remember that, like, we all, you know, have this inner child inside of us that's still there, that has these passions, these interests, these loves, and reconnect to those things. Don't give up. Remember that you are so not alone. You don't know how not alone you are. And stay strong. Just stay strong, rest, drink a lot of water, and take it a day at a time. Take things one day at a time, and just know how very, very special and loved you are.
Jessie kind of wrapped it up all in one thing. I was going to say some of the same. But yeah, take it one day at a time, and just be gentle with yourself. Like, I know for me, I was always very critical, especially when it came to trauma. And I've been slowly learning to just kind of talk myself down from that and just be like, I'm not going to have everything figured out in a week or a day or 3 months, a year. It's a process. And what matters is that you keep going and figure out what works best for you, because not everyone's going to want to do the same thing.
I was going to say a lot of the same. And in terms of like being gentle with yourself, one of my classmates actually had a really good metaphor that they used for dealing with like major depressive disorder. And I think it applies really well to trauma in that you're dealing with like all the rest of life stuff, and then this on top of it is basically like working another full-time job. So like thinking about how you just can't expect yourself to be 100% every day when you're dealing with like all of this extra on top of it, to be honest. And that is helpful for me to remember, and it's also helpful for me to remember that like I would never talk to somebody else the way that I talk to myself sometimes, and trying to be understanding. Like, if you feel like you're being needy, just imagine how you would respond to somebody else in the same situation. Like, I would never turn someone away if they were trying to talk, and I would be happy that they were trying to talk to me about it rather than bottling it up. So I try to remember that, like, whenever I'm talking to like a friend about something, or like talking to my therapist and I'm starting to feel like I'm being needy, I just remember that I would never be as critical of myself from like an outside perspective. So that's really helpful, and just remembering that you're not a burden. The people around you love you and care for you. And if you're like me, you'll probably think you are anyway, but continuing to build that support system of people who make you feel loved is really, really important.
I would say something that's been really important for me to learn is the importance of forgiveness within yourself, specifically, obviously, with other people as well, if that's something that you choose to do. But I think forgiving, sometimes you might have in reaction to trauma, it might affect your relationships in a negative manner, that you might regret, or you might feel as though that's your responsibility for destroying a relationship, or for having negative effects, losing a job, being unkind. There are so many things, we all have reactions that we can't necessarily control, and trauma reactions that are going to affect our lives in very real physical ways. And so being able to forgive yourself and to love yourself despite whatever past behavior, take accountability in the ways that you choose, but also continue to show up for yourself and continue to do the work of loving yourself and knowing that it is not your fault that you were abused. I think that that's something that a lot of us know intellectually, but sometimes it can be really, really hard to internalize, especially when you're trying to heal, of feeling like, oh, well, if this hadn't happened, I'd be so much further in life, or I would have a better relationship, or I would whatever, of really taking the time to know that it is not your fault and that you deserve love. And as was said, you are not a burden. You deserve to be loved with the same unconditional and vibrant love that you put into the world, and that it is okay to take time with yourself. It is okay to move on through things. That doesn't mean that you're forgetting that they happened. And it's okay to put yourself first and to prioritize your own needs and your own mental health over your relationship sometimes. And it's okay to take that step back and really focus on you.
Healing is a process, so it's important that you're kind to yourself daily. As survivors, you guys are back. You're not alone. Your life has value. There's hope, and I think you owe it to yourself to get the support and love that you need to help you.
I'll be echoing everything you all said. Some of the things that I had written down were to be gentle and kind to yourself, and I think patient as well, because like we all said, you have to take this a little bit at a time, whether it's every second, every minute, hour, or day. Trust your instincts and your gut on things. I think especially as women, we've been taught and projected to not trust ourselves. We've been told that we're overreactive, overly emotional, is starting at a young age, and it tends to impact our ability to trust ourselves. So really listening to your body, listening to your gut instincts, and trusting that, whether it's like taking a bath and slowing down, or like going off the grid for a day from technology, or if someone makes you uncomfortable, trusting that and not talking yourself out of it. Knowing, like, protecting your space, I think that's really important, like having good boundaries, knowing what your limitations are, knowing like your battery level. I like to equate it to like our cell phone battery, like how much capacity do you have? Are you at 50%? Are you at 10? Like, do you need to fill yourself up, kind of thing? And what do you need to do that? And you deserve good things. I remember one of the things I would tell myself, because I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I deserved good things. And I had to put like Post-it notes around with positive affirmations, telling myself like, I deserve good things. The world isn't out to get me. And whatever happened to you was not your fault, and you didn't deserve that.